All right, the first cycle of the book of Revelation that we want to understand, and we're going to see it is telling us this five-part story from a certain perspective, right? They're not going to tell the five-part story the same way. They're going to tell it from a certain perspective. And the first one we are going to try to understand is the seven seals. Did I write that correct? The seven seals, right? So we are going to, before we look at that, we're going to have to arm ourselves with interpreting it well from something that we already knew before we ever came to the book of Revelation, right? So when John writes the book of Revelation, Jesus has already taught his disciples something about what to expect about the end of the age, right? So we're going to go to Matthew 24, verses 3 through 14, the Olivet Discourse, right? This is another passage that weighs heavy in people's interpretation on the end times. And we're going to see, just like Revelation's not going to be that complicated of a book, this discussion is not that complicated, right? So let's just start reading in chapter 24, verse 3. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the close of the age." So they want Jesus to explain the close of the age. Verses 1 to 2 did matter some, but for our discussion right now, they don't. All right. And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear," right? So let's hear what he says what's going to happen here. You're going to hear wars and rumors of wars. Let's put that on our Matthew 24 list. Wars, right? It says, "See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet." So we learned something about what Jesus is trying to do in this passage we're reading right here. He's trying to tell them not what's going to be a sign of the stuff at the very end. He's trying to tell them that when all through this age, there's going to be wars. So when you hear about a war, do not freak out and think the end has come, right? Can you imagine how many people at World War I, they have never seen war on a scale like that in the history, in Indian history, and how many of them probably thought this is it, this is the end, this is the climactic end times events unfolding right in front of us. And then with World War II, but they weren't the end. And if they listened to Matthew 24, they would have known that just because you see war, don't freak out and think it's the end, that it is one of the markers here for the end time, that they're going to come, they're going to go, and they're not the end. As I slept, right, last night, Russia finally invaded Ukraine. That does not mean the end of time is here, right? So there's going to be wars. In other words, Jesus is trying to arm them for a long wait. And he says, during this long wait for my return, do not think every time you hear a war, the end is nigh, right? So we keep going. He says, verse 7, "For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines." Let's add that to our list. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. I don't want to put earthquakes here because I will, just for completeness sake. I don't want people to say I'm cherry picking. All right, so earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of birth pangs. In other words, the time of delivery, the big finale, is not here. Every time you hear an earthquake, every time there's a famine somewhere, every time there is a COVID disease somewhere, that these things are not the end. They're going to instead be things that happen throughout this age, and he wants them to know that because his goal here is to arm them to settle in for the long wait to Jesus' return, right? So what else is it? Verse 9, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake, right? So what do we see here? There's going to be martyrs, right? There's going to be lots of martyrs, right? And that's it. Once again, that is just part of what is going on in this age, right? People are going to die for the gospel, right? It says, verse 10, and then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray, and because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. So he's saying that there's going to be many people who begin upon the journey of following Christ, but because of this age and all its hardships, they are going to fall away. We see that in many places of Scripture. All right, verse 13, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. You see his motive again here. He's trying to arm them to wait out this long step 2 of the story of redemptive history. Right? Verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed through the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So one other thing that has to happen during this age is that gospel must go to all nations. The end will not come until the gospel has gone to all nations. All right? So there we are. That's the Olivet Discourse. These are the things that Jesus has already taught us to expect as a regular thing in step 2 of the story. He says these are the things that are not yet. And then he's going to go on Olivet Discourse, and he's going to talk especially about step 4, the return of Christ, because that's what they asked him about. But his first goal was to say, hold your horses, get ready for a long wait, and in this long wait, there's going to be wars, famines, earthquakes, martyrs for the gospel, and we've got to get the gospel to all the nations.